put up buildings very fast. You can open them up quicker than you can concrete frame buildings. You can get occupants in, start generating revenue faster. So everyone wins in that situation. There's reduced cost. A steel frame can be less costly than concrete frames. So when there's reduced cost, everyone wins, again, by the use of steel frame. Optimization of space. I told you we designed the wide plan structural shape so that we can go longer spans. So we have the wide range of structural shapes today that fit all the applications that could be used in building frame construction and also bridges. Maximize flexibility. Maximize flexibility. You can't, in some concrete frame buildings, if after the building is built and occupied, if you want to have a tenant change. The tenant wants to occupy 2 floors and wants to maybe cut a floor through a bay and insert a stairwell. Well, you can't do that in some types of concrete frame buildings, especially those with post-tension floor systems. With steel framing, it can be accommodated very easily, and I'll show you that. So those are the advantages for using steel in multi-story residential. Now, here's your first system. The staggered truss steel framing system. This is a project in Chicago, now called the Godfrey. It was called the Staybridge Suites Hotel in downtown Chicago. This building utilizes staggered truss steel framing. This framing system is very unique. It has basically 3 components in steel. 3 types of members. It has columns, it has beams, and it has trusses. And that's it. If you look at the schematic very closely, you'll see something else kind of unique about the building. There are no interior columns. All the columns are around the exterior perimeter. A very unique feature of this system. Yes, you do have story-high trusses that carry the floor loads all the way from the top of the building down to the foundation through the columns. But you can design your spaces to take into account these trusses that carry the loads. And I'll show you some of that. This is an example of a staggered truss frame being erected. I'm on the first floor, ground level. You don't see any columns there. You see all the framing that's starting to be erected. And this is an example of how column-free space in a residential type structure like a hotel can be advantageous. Rather than have columns in the middle of the space that block views and interrupt this usable space. So we like lots of usable space, and the flexibility of steel brings that to you. So back to the staggered truss frames. You'll notice that the trusses are alternating on every floor. You go over a bay and there's a truss. It's either above the floor or below the floor. So you have story-height trusses that carry the floor load. Alternating trusses by floor, every other floor has a different layout of trusses. They're the same trusses that can be used repetitively, but they're just on different floors. Now the spans, let me describe this. This would be basically a cereal box, cereal wheat breakfast. These are what staggered truss frames typically can look like. They're very narrow, and they're very long. So typically a truss width, the span of the truss between the 2 columns, basically your span of the columns in the longitudinal direction would be about the span of the truss divided by 2. And that would be your column spacing. You would use yes. The question is, are you going to get this presentation by email or whatever? whatever. I believe Juan Manuel will provide it to you on the website, the ANDI website, correct? There you go. So you don't have to take too many notes. And I assume those with computers out are taking very copious notes. All right. So where were we? Okay. So in typical residential buildings, you may have a double loading corridor. A corridor where people will walk right down the center of the building with rooms on both sides of the corridor. So to accommodate that, the trusses have a built-in Viridial opening. A Viridial opening provides that rigid space, so you don't have to have diagonals blocking that corridor space. And the frame itself can be a moment frame compared to a brace frame. Now, the beauty of this, 3 elements, columns, beams, and trusses. Because the majority of the steel is comprised of trusses, fabricators can provide a unique jig, a layout or a template, that would provide the fabrication of these trusses very easily. So the more trusses you have, the less cost there is over time. It's good for mid or high-rise apartments and hotels, dormitories, and even hospitals in some cases. Minimum 5 to 6 floors because of the repetition of the use of trusses. You start seeing the economies of the use of trusses after 4 or 5 levels. It says maximum 25 stories. That's not necessarily the case, depending on the design. This is a look through on the floor. And I'm standing right in the corridor, looking right down where the corridor would be. This is the actual corridor, which you can't see that well. But you can see what the opening is that would accommodate the walkway, passageway for the various pedestrian traffic to the various rooms on either side of the double-loaded corridor. This is the Godfrey Hotel. This is the Godfrey Hotel being erected. So you can see the trusses and the type of application used to stack the truss. Now also note that it's not a serial box. That the architecture is such that they wanted some relief. They wanted to have a little different type of an architecture rather than just a box like frames. This can be easily accommodated with staggered truss. Now, yes. Okay, you have a better opportunity to tell them the name. But I will tell it their name. Apparently people are using cell phones and they're doing something with their hands. In other words, don't do that. Now in the United States, I'll make a joke because the NSA may be listening to this, so we don't want any security breaches or anything like that. A steel structure? Okay, that has nothing to do with the electronic stuff. Okay. All right. Okay, Jared, are we okay?
It's still doing this with plastic bags.
Plastic, apparently plastic bags. Now, why would you hear plastic bags? Yeah, but why did you hear that? Well, the other places have come through. I don't understand it. I'm not an electrical engineer or electronic. I just know how to turn the computer on. All right. We're going to continue.
Por favor, las personas que están usando las bolsas plásticas, no parece, pero sí es bastante molesto y no lo oigo a él. Y también, por favor, si pueden apagar sus celulares, la onda de radio del celular entra por mis audífonos y no lo oigo. Entonces, por favor, gracias.